Um, if everyone's ready, okay, well, why don't we go ahead and start the meeting? And Divine, let the records reflect that both Councilmember Paula and myself are present along with city staff.
Okay.
And we'll go ahead and open public comment. Anyone wishing to address the City Council Subcommittee on items that do not appear on the agenda may do so. We have no one here at the library.
Okay.
You can see them very nicely on the.
Right, I can.
So
I don't see any hands raised right now, but I will promote a couple of people to panelists.
okay,
Got Vanessa and Rodora,
all right.
and I'll make them panelists. But other than that, we don't have any hands raised. If anyone like to speak on this public comment item, please raise your hand. You can find the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen in the middle. Okay, there are no hands for this particular item.
Okay, thank you. Next is communication. And there are two pieces of communication. The first one is in regards to a letter placing a three-way stop at the intersection of Jefferson and Champlain. And so there's if you have the agenda, item number 4A, it's not the intersection at Sonoma Drive in Clover Springs, but it is Jefferson and Champlain. So do we want to discuss that? I've looked at the letter.
So to the chair, I'd just like to see what staff, if they had a chance, our city engineer and look at that intersection.
Hi, good afternoon. I believe that there are actually two different stop sign requests here. And so Sonoma and Clover Springs is indeed a request. And then there is also another one for Champlain and North Jefferson.
That's correct, Vanessa. There was error in the agenda. That was my mistake for mixing the two items. The item for Sonoma Drive was on the Public Works Subcommittee, the last meeting of January 25th. And that's a matter that we'll be reviewing. And the item on the agenda today is specific to Mr. Opatz, who wrote a letter requesting a three-way stop at Champlain and North Jefferson. So if I can, Vanessa, I know you and I haven't spoken about this specific request, but I think staff's proposed idea is to have our transportation engineer, Debbie Trans, take a look at both of these requests. We've got some additional requests as well that we needed to evaluate from a traffic safety perspective in conjunction with our interim city engineer. Some of these issues do necessitate a formal traffic engineer to assess the request and determine whether they are appropriate given the specific location of the request and the nature and the design of the particular intersections. And I know with the initial request for the stop sign in Sonoma, we've had some subsequent correspondence as well. And I think so it would be critical to really look at that from a safety perspective, whether it's recommended or not to make that change. And I think likewise here it would be provide, assuming that the subcommittee chair and subcommittee councilmember Paula, you agree, we'll Vanessa will take a look at this and we'll ask our consulting transportation engineer to evaluate the request and provide a report back, either the subcommittee or if it's recommended to bring it back if needed for formal recommendation to council.
So will you communicate that to both of these people so they're aware?
Absolutely.
And can we get a timeline after you talk to W Trans as to when we can expect that, and that'll be part of the communication.
Right. We'll do it.
Okay, good.
I think this is an area where we're seeing with increased frequency requests to make modifications to, our transportation infrastructure, and often it does involve, kind of a technical review that, we want to utilize a transportation engineer to really look at it. So during the budget process, I'll be requesting that we include a funding item or a line item in the budget for transportation engineering services, so we can more speedily review these issues when they come up. And so we have a kind of a built-in budget process for it.
Okay.
Vanessa, did you have anything that you wanted to offer to the subcommittee members just in terms of this particular communication?
No, I think W-Trans is a good place to start.
So just to follow up, I could, is there the budget part, is that going to be dependent before we do this look at these, or because I want to kind of get a timeline in my mind?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know yet in terms of what their proposal would be to actually do this assessment. Sometimes it's a very simple assessment, and it can be done at a cost that we can absorb within the budget. But I want to make sure that's accurate. I want to bring it to the subcommittee first, make sure you want us to move forward and evaluate this request.
Just, if I could make a suggestion, it would be helpful, maybe knowing that we have all these assessments coming up, it might be beneficial to put a budget amendment in place so you have money before we even sign paper. This way, because we're looking at 4th Street, we're looking at this one, we're looking at Sonoma, we know there's at least 3 that are on the table right now, and there may be more that I'm not even aware of. So it might be worthwhile to just have some money set aside so as we can start working on these in a timely manner.
Yeah, they give us the authority, staff the authority to just give task orders as needed to have them take a look at these.
Because these are important requests.
Right.
I want to make sure.
And I have no idea what that would run price-wise for them to even take a look at it. I am familiar with that intersection because I come up Jefferson to Portofino, or when I go down to School Street, of course, I go right by that intersection. I've never noticed an issue there. But then again, I'm not there when school is letting out. But we'll see what the study says.
So could we just have this moved to, as just for a real brief update at our next meeting under pending items, where we're at as far as what the budget amendment as well as W-Trans, and I'd like I say, helpful if we communicate to the author of these letters of what we're doing.
Absolutely. So staff will work on a budget, proposal from W-Trans to provide transportation engineering services, kind of on call, and get a scope for that. We could probably start for the remainder of this fiscal year, start with something modest, but kind of get that in place so we have that available to us. Because these tend to be outside the scope of traditional city engineer services usually. But right, Vanessa, you want to bring in kind of the transportation safety, the safety perspective, and then we'll have that in place. But absolutely, Councilmember Paul, what we'll do is I'll work with them to get a proposal to be able to communicate out both to Mr. Opat's parties that are interested in the stop sign in Sonoma, and we may even want to look at this next issue with respect to item 4B on the agenda.
So you're become 4B, the Wolfrell's Parklet process they have.
Right, this matter was referred to us by Councilmember Cruz. The concern was about the patio extension on Main Street, and that it may create unsafe conditions for drivers or people walking out in the street. And so I think this is an area that we can also take a look at from a transportation safety perspective. But I know our community development director, Kevin Thompson, had correspondence with the Workhouse Brewery, and I think there is some interest in them establishing a formal, more permanent outdoor dining area. And for us to consider that, I think what we want to do is bring forward the guidelines that have been adopted by Sonoma County, and a number of the jurisdictions have adopted them for providing guidelines around development of parklets. So that's something we could bring back to this committee, take a look at, and then ultimately, if you're supported, bring it forward to council. And that way, the intent being is to adopt guidelines, and if a restaurant or another business develops a proposed parklet that's consistent with the guidelines, it gives staff the authority to review and approve it. But again, council can weigh in on that, on how you'd like to see that process be addressed for these coming forward. I imagine over time there might be more of these. I know in the past, Chair, we've seen that we had a request from a downtown business, Dawning Sage, to possibly look at doing an outdoor parklet. And at that time, we did try to develop the draft guidelines, but then the county stepped up and developed them and asked various jurisdictions to adopt them so that we had consistent guidelines throughout the county. And they're pretty good. I mean, I think they cover the issues.
The current Wolf House, the owner now just started to go with Brady. He wants to improve it. He wanted to know if, the city would be open to making it permanent, where he would get an actual wood structure and make it look nicer. So he is interested in that. He does have the current encroachment permits. We have insurance and all that. The other thing I just want to mention about the current one is Mark Rincon and I went out. We used the Sonoma guidelines, even though we hadn't adopted them. It was kind of a time of COVID where people were kind of scrambling, but we did make him pull it back a little further, and he didn't meet the standards of the Sonoma. Even again, the city hadn't formally adopted them, but we did use those.
Just like Mr. Chair, just two other things. One is on the parking. There is a vehicle that tends to park between First Street and the structure. And I saw one that was a van actually that really, it's like a wall, it literally blocks the visibility. So maybe if we move forward with making it permanent, we really want to look at whether there should be parking at that particular spot right there, because it does obstruct considerably. The second thing is, I'd like to see maybe with the wind shelter shades that come down, maybe having them clear so you could see through them when through the vehicle. Right now it just blocks everything. So those are the two comments I wanted to mention.
All right. So we'll wait until that comes back, because there's also Zinni's is the only other one that I know that has a parklet technically, but that's on private property. Yeah. But nevertheless, I'm not sure if that impedes their parking requirements by doing that. So I think we should probably take a look at them being on private property as well. So, okay, with that being said, and Yvonne, why don't you just interrupt if you ever see any hands out in the audience, all right?
I can do that, yes.
Okay. So next is the approval of the meeting minutes from January 25th. And that should be 2022.
Yes,
Okay, so if we can make that change.
sure.
And speaking of 2022, does anyone want to take a break at 2:22 this afternoon? And just kind of see if there's a portal somewhere that we can jump through? Okay, well, if you do, just raise your hand. So Councilmember Holland.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the approval of the minutes as amended from 2021 to actually 2022.
Okay, I'll concur with that, and so consider them approved. Next item is water supply update and drought response. And David, is this yours or Kevin?
Well, Chair, if I can, I'd like to introduce Redora Migatan. Redora is here from West Yost. And before she begins her presentation, just a brief overview on this item. This item pertains to the Russian River drought response and a pending voluntary water conservation agreement. At your last meeting, you received a presentation from Redora that provided an overview of this process that the State Water Board is implementing. The process that they're implementing is really kind of the way to kind of look at it is an alternative to the current curtailment order. What the State Board is trying to do is to seek agreement among the stakeholders in the Upper Russian River to a program to address ongoing drought conditions. We expect in May of this year that the State Water Board will determine what the conditions are for the water year and enact whatever requirements they deem are appropriate to address those water conditions. It appears that we are confronted with another relatively dry year. The Upper Russian is a little bit better shape this year than it was last year, but nonetheless, we do expect we're not going to be far out of it. We're going to continue to experience drought conditions. So this process that the State Board is developing is something that we expect to bring forward to the council to determine whether you want to participate or not in the voluntary process as an alternative to the being subject to the curtailment order. And the direction from the subcommittee was to provide an update to the council. We did include the last memo on the council agenda, and this memo is again included on the council agenda for this week, so to keep the council informed. But we have the benefit today of Redora providing us a very current update and walking us through a presentation on kind of the latest. It's been an ongoing iterative process with the State Board and the stakeholders in the Upper Russian River. So it's developing fairly quickly. And even last week, myself, Redora, our attorneys, Palmer, Hilton, Viviana Hager, met with State Board representatives to kind of talk about our concerns. Our focus really was on acknowledging that we have pre-1914 rights. Not all the water users in the Upper Russian do. There's a whole set of water rights, and what we really kind of wanted to reflect is that pre-1914 has a higher priority in water use than the other water right holders. But with that said, it's also complicated because the reservoir, Lake Mendocino, is managed by Sonoma Water. And how do you differentiate between reservoir water versus natural in-stream flows versus riparian water, and acknowledging that within the context of the supply and the users is something that this process is trying to address. So with that said, Redora, I'd like to just go ahead and turn it over to you. And if you want to walk the subcommittee through your presentation, that would be great.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Walter and Councilmember Paula. I have been working with the Russian River Drought Response Group steering committee for a few months now, and it's, as I described in an earlier meeting, and as David explained, this has been an iterative process, and in the last few weeks, a number of options have advanced. And now the steering committee is looking for feedback from users to see if they wish to, what features of the proposed options are preferred. So I'm going to start with my presentation. I think, yes, my screen is being shared. So let's get started. So just a little bit of background about the Russian River Drought Response Group Steering Committee. Again, it's seeking ways to avoid curtailment by having users voluntarily conserve water. The goal is to avoid curtailment of water diversion from the Russian River. It's consensus-based water conservation agreement, and it's voluntary. And the State Water Board staff plans to present this agreement, or if an agreement is reached, at the May 2022 State Water Board meeting. In that same time, the State Water Board will be considering adopting regulations for another dry year. So in the past several months, the group has been developing water conservation options, and they feel that they've developed at least 3 water conservation options that they may wish to include in a voluntary conservation agreement. The voluntary water conservation agreement would include the water conservation option, and they hope that it would be a model for managing water supplies for future dry years. And they would like to have an agreement that would be able to be amended based on information and experience gained by the agreement participants over the years. So they hope to incorporate this voluntary water conservation agreement in future curtailment activities, with the goal to delay or altogether avoid curtailment of users. So today we're going to be reviewing the potential water conservation options and provide feedback for me to take back to the steering committee. So as I go through the options, there are a few questions that you should consider and think about as you're reviewing the options. Would the city participate in an agreement if it uses any of the presented options? What is the city's preferred water conservation option and why? What specific features of the water conservation option would encourage the city to participate in the agreement? Or what features the city do not like in those options? What changes would be needed in order for the city to participate in a water conservation option? And the city's baseline for water conservation is its 2017 to 2019 map. That is what's behind the options that I will be providing. What are the benefits or challenges in using the proposed baseline for the city? And then I think this one really needs some careful consideration. What is the viable water conservation percentage for the city? So for each of the water conservation options, the conservation would be based on the user's 2017 to 2019 historical water demands. 2 of them consider water right priority and 1 does not. They all consider the availability of water supply at the Russian River diversion point. They all provide for minimum water needs for human health and safety. And they have a goal of maintaining minimum in-stream flows. So the 3 water conservation program options are, they have a preferred option A, which is in stages. Option B is exchange of water, and option C is flat rate. Everyone conserves at a flat percentage throughout the Russian River watershed. And I'll go into detail with each of the options. So the first option is the preferred option A, which is based on conservation stages. And for this option, in May, the state will announce the conservation necessary per month to avoid curtailment. And users would commit to monthly amounts of conservation ranging between 15% to 70%, depending on water rights and water source, and depending on water supply conditions. Transfers and exchanges among water users are permissible. So this kind of has a little bit of a regional water market going on. There's quite a bit of data and information analysis required, which means that it may not be implementable for the 2022 dry season. In this option, just based on raw data without additional feedback or detailed analysis for the city, the table I included in this slide shows what it would mean in terms of conservation. Now, so I don't know if you can see on screen the spreadsheet. So I'm gonna see if I can move the slide over. It kind of zooms in on this. So for the preferred option, we should be looking at pre-1914 rights, because that is the city's water rights. And I have to point out that there are stages, and the stages are based on the predominant source of the water supply. So this is not necessarily in alignment with the state's water shortage contingency plan stages. Those stages are based on the shortage, the difference between your water supply and water demand. These are based on the availability of water supply at the Russian River diversion points. So for stage one, where natural and Potter Valley project water is insufficient, the city would have to conserve 15%, along with other water rights holders. And that would allow post-1960 water rights holders to have a little bit of water. They would have to conserve 38% to be able to continue with their water supply. And so that's the same for the percentages go up as the region becomes drier and your predominant source of water supply changes, such that at a point where natural flows are not available, the city would have to save 50%. That's at stage 4, and everybody else would have to conserve by 72%. Pre-1960 and post-1960 water rights holders would have no water sources. They would have to look for alternative sources. Pre-1949 and 1949 rights holders would have to conserve 72%, along with pre-1955 water rights holders. In stage 5, there wouldn't be adequate water supply for everyone but pre-1914 water rights holders. And so there wouldn't be any need for the city to conserve its water supply. However, all other users would not have water supply unless they do transfers or have alternative sources. So that's how this table is read. Stage 6 is when curtailment would have to happen. At this point, water would be supplied for human health and safety needs. But otherwise, everyone is curtailed. So that's how this water, this table is read. And so this is the preferred option. We can make changes to this column. Perhaps 50% is not the right percentage for the city. Or maybe we want to stay at 15% or 20% through all of summer instead of changing what your monthly water conservation rate would have to be. So there's a lot of options available to the city here in terms of what you want to do, what feedback you want to give to the steering committee. So I'm going to pause right here. And I think you have a copy of my slides and the questions that I shared earlier. And I wanted to see if the steering committee has any feedback regarding this option.
Thank you, Rita. Councilmember Paula, any questions?
Well, I don't have any real questions, but I do have concerns that the straight percentage doesn't distinguish between residential and businesses. And we do have several businesses that do work within the ale, beer, and it takes quite a bit of water to make a gallon of beer. And these are businesses that are vital to the community as well as jobs, big jobs within here, as well as wineries. So I would like to see if there's a way to somehow take those into consideration as rather than just a straight percentage, because if we start penalizing businesses, that there goes the economy and jobs, and that's a concern. So that ripple effect is one of my biggest concerns. Coupled with firefighting, as you know, with wildfires, considerable water is used, and there's no way to really distinguish what's being used for firefighting versus what residents are using to take a shower or wash their laundry. So somehow I'm just concerned with the straight percentage across water use citywide. Somehow it needs to be, at least I'd like to see it better accounted for. So that's my initial comments.
Thank you. Yvonne, anyone out there in the audience with anything to share? I don't see any hands raised.
Yeah, I don't see any hands raised at this time either.
I just have a couple of questions. On the slide that you have on the screen right now, bullet number 2, users commit to monthly amounts of conservation between 15 and 70%. So if we were to do it on a voluntary basis, we would be expected to do that. But what does a 70% reduction mean for Cloverdale? I think right now, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, we're at so many gallons per user per day. Is this 70% already for us, or would we involve Walker or Champlain?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the simple answer is it requires us to do some additional analysis, and I'll share with you why. Is the current curtailment order, set minimum health and safety standards, 55 gallons per person per day, based on our population. And so it wasn't really a fixed percentage per se, as it was a hard number of gallons per person per day based on your population. And what that meant is us actually looking at our total water use and comparing that to the calculated water use under that scenario. And I think it's well in excess of 50%, a 50% reduction. I don't have the exact number.
Okay.
And what we see is, again, that number was set irrespective of the season. And over a year's time, we see the real seasonal water use. So, as you can imagine, in the summertime, water use goes up, and then in the wintertime, it goes down. And the 55 gallons per person per day didn't account for that. And it didn't really address either the user type. So it didn't differentiate between residential customers, commercial customers, other uses. So what we did, just as background, was look at our water use data and determine based on our population what our water needs were to meet what we determined is our requirements. And that's where we filed a petition to the state identifying about 104 gallons per person per day. So that accounts for the kind of the commercial customers that we value and we know have water needs for their businesses. In addition to that, we also looked at the other types of water use in our community that are necessary to be able to bring the water to our customers. We call that our non-consumptive use. For instance, when we pump water from the plant, there's a process that it goes through where actually some of that water is used in that process. And you see that at the plant where there's an area where that water gets pumped into. And so we were able to calculate that, and that's our non-consumptive use. So where I'm going with this is that was really based on, curtailment order was a set of hard numbers that they applied kind of unilaterally across the board. In this process, they're actually trying to assess and look at our historical use again over that 3-year time frame from 2017, 18, 19, and then take a percentage of that average use to kind of meet this criteria. They know what our water use is because we report that pretty consistently to the state board. So there's the corresponding sheet to this percentage data that actually shows the amount of gallons that are being utilized or being reported out of the system that water users are using from the Upper Russian River. So that kind of helped inform, how they could get the necessary water, meet these targets by reducing by the percentage. How much water would that, keep in the system, so to speak. So what we kind of need to do is go back and really look at what we're doing, what we've done now under the curtailment order versus what it means under this scenario. I think from my perspective, this appears to be a little bit more friendly to the city in terms of the curtailment order. One, you're looking at a 3-year average versus a hard set number. I think the onus would still be on us to break down what does that water use look like for our different customers. And that's where council has some discretion. In our water shortage contingency plan, we set these stages, and right now we're at stage 4 where we've said, everybody reduced by 35%. But council can, we can look at that and what makes sense is what do you want the commercial sector to be reduced by versus what do you want the residential to use? Because the 55 GPCD number is really based on minimum residential use. It's not a real good number for how you address commercial water use or water demand. And so it really doesn't take into account those commercial users. Again, I think that's where Redora is saying that there needs to be some additional work needs to be put into this effort to help refine this data and to look at it in the context of our own water use. So we could do an analysis of those 3 years and say, well, what does the 15% target look like, and compare that to the curtailment order where we're at with our health and safety petition and our 104 GPCD. We compare that to, say, meaning at stage 1 at normal, and stage 2, stage 3, and where does that put us relative to our current situation where we're under the curtailment order. I think that would be appropriate, Redora, would be to kind of do that analysis for council.
Yes, yeah, we need to do that. We need to take that step.
right? And Redora's already kind of primed us last week, asked them, let's dive in, let's do that analysis. But this was the current framework that the state board is offering as an alternative to the curtailment order. And kind of just, want to keep this subcommittee up to date on kind of how this is developing. One of my comments last week with the state board is you can see in stage 1, 2, and 3, we're kind of treated similarly as the other water right types. Not all of them, but 15 for riparian pre-1942 down to pre-1960 is, can there be some adjustment in those percentages? So for example, maybe riparian and pre-1914 are 10 and 1949, 1955 are 20. So I think, that's a point we might be able to offer as feedback that again reflects that we're a higher priority user within the system from a water rights perspective, and acknowledge that so that the percentages maybe of conservation reflect, our unique situation relative to our water rights. So, but this is again the framework that's being developed today, and I think there might be some opportunity for further refinement of these percentages, but also the need to actually do the data crunching around what does this mean in comparison to the curtailment order.
I was just going to ask, it's pretty simple, whether the stages are declared by the state water board, or who's the group that determines which stage we're in?
The stages would be based on the availability of water supply through that dry season. So as you go into the dry year, perhaps you'll have more natural flows in the beginning, and then natural flows would go down, and only water from Lake Mendocino would be available for water supply. And at that point, there's going to have to be somebody who's going to be looking at the data and looking at water supply availability over time, and then communicating out to the users where they are in stages, and then the users would then have to decide, what water conservation efforts they want to implement for that month. I would say that for the city to get tens of thousands of people and commercial users to change course every month is a little bit more difficult. I would argue for the city to have a flat conservation target through the summer season, just to keep water conservation sustained, and there would be less confusion for your users. That's one of the feedback I'm developing for the steering committee.
Redora, David had mentioned something in his response a couple of minutes ago, and I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask you. He had mentioned that there was water that we couldn't use that was put into a holding pond. We don't get any credit for anything we put back into the river, do we?
Under this option, that wasn't even considered.
So right now, we don't get credit per se, but what we're allowed to utilize that water in addition to our minimum petition. So it gives us a little bit of additional cushion. So our petition, we got approval for 105 gallons per person per day. We, under our non-consumptive use petition, it was for an additional 5 gallons per person per day. So it kind of brings up.
So we do get some sort of a credit for it.
Yeah. I mean, it's an allowable use, recognizing that we, additional allowable use beyond our minimum health and safety requirements that we filed.
Two more questions, Vidora, but the next one is, in one of your slides, you had mentioned that they were going to maintain in-stream flows. Does that mean that dredging in the center of the river is going to be allowed again, or how do they propose doing that? You know?
Let me go through that option the Sonoma Water is required to maintain in-stream flows, and that would be water from Lake Mendocino. And in all of these options, in-stream flows has to continue at the minimum. So in addition to like the human health and safety needs, those in-stream flows would have to be maintained throughout the season.
Okay.
Waterway is.
Yeah, that's, oh, okay. So they're just basically talking about water that they're releasing as opposed to flowing in the center of the.
Supposing the physical changes is the water that's released.
And then, geez, just, you know, looking at the worst case scenario, you know, stage 4 or 5, I just can't imagine how that would be enforced. But maybe I'm just thinking too far ahead on that. I mean, I could imagine telling the city that, you know, they have to find alternative sources. So.
Technically, everyone gets to have like minimum human health and safety supplies. But yeah, it would be really difficult. But you know, 2021 is a stage 6. So everyone's supposed to be curtailed, including the city. And everyone gets human health and safety water supply. That's about it.
Sure. Who would be responsible for enforcing those numbers? And is there fines attached to that potentially?
So these are conceptual water conservation percentages. And so it's being distributed right now to users. This is information being disseminated to users. And then based on the feedback, the committee will go back and hammer out the details of the water conservation options and the agreement itself, which may include things like who's going to enforce it.
Vidora, the simple answer is that has not been fully vetted yet.
Yes, that hasn't been vetted yet.
So it's still ongoing.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate one comment. I know not every city has 2 beer breweries within their city like we do. And we also have at least 2 wineries that produce wine. There may be 3, I'm not sure, but I know of 2. I really think, you know, those should be kind of identified as an additional. I mean, it's got to be recognized somewhere, because not every city, 50% or 30% reduction would mean one thing in the city with none of those versus a city that has these types of industrial businesses in their city limits. So I just want that. I'd like to see that as part of the conversation as you go forward, to see if that could be distinguished and somehow identified and addressed.
Thank you. Any other questions from participants? I see none in the room here, and I see none on the virtual. So thank you very much, Vidora, for the presentation.
Chair, we do have just a couple more slides. Choose.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
I think the others will be a little bit faster. So this one's the committee spent quite a bit of time trying to really put details into this, and as you can see, this one they developed a spreadsheet for. So you can tell that this is the preferred options, and they want to enhance it and add more details. So we'll communicate the comments, the committee's comments to them. Okay, so the next option is an exchange. So this one, the way that this would work is in May, the State Water Board will announce the opening of an exchange. And this would be based on rainfall, in-stream flows, and Lake Mendocino storage. What's available in Lake Mendocino? Users would agree to conserve based on their water rights early in the dry season and receive a credit for conserved water for use later in the season. And the water would be stored at Lake Mendocino. This doesn't provide a carryover into future years. So for instance, if the city conserved more than it anticipated, any available water supply that the city could serve that's in Lake Mendocino would not carry over into the next year. But what the city can do is take that water or water that it doesn't feel that it would need to supply for its own use, and you can sell it to others in the region. So this one really is more of a developing a regional water market for everyone. And for this, the availability of water is dependent on the number of participants, but water conserved does not always equal water available, because there would be evaporation that's occurring at the lake, and Sonoma Water needs to maintain minimum in-stream flows for the environment. This one needs a regional administrator. And because this is also data and information intensive, it may not be ready to be implemented this dry season, but in future years. So option A and B are a little bit more complex. And so the committee doesn't feel like they can roll it out well this coming season. So I'm going to pause here again to get the committee's comments on this particular option.
Just a question, is this particular option something that the Sonoma Water is particularly interested in because they maintain the Lake Mendocino?
Sonoma Water's interested in all of the options, obviously, but you know, they didn't share which option they preferred, but they are thinking about how they would be able to roll these options out.
Medora, you know, if you want input on option B, you know, I just don't like the bullet point that says users may use the water or transfer the water, sell to others. You know, it almost makes it like we're making a profit, or somebody's making a profit on the backs of somebody else who's suffering, and or by over conserving and making a profit on the ratepayers. So I'm not in favor of being able to sell water from one jurisdiction or from one city to another. It just doesn't seem right.
Okay, but just to you know, kind of flip that perspective for consideration. And I mean, I agree with you. You could also look at this through the lens if you know, some of the diverters are agricultural users, and you under that scenario, it's kind of like paying them not to use that water for agricultural purposes, so that it could be used for you know, health and safety needs, for example. I just want to that I think that's kind of where this option was going, is that it starts to create that market for water, looking at it as a kind of, there's a relatively fixed supply. And that, a city like Cloverdale could pay, if we were short on water, we could pay an agricultural user who might otherwise have a right to divert for their water, that we would then, they would forego, but then we would use it. So that's just one example, I think, of where that may come in to be beneficial to Cloverdale. But likewise, it could be like you said, it could be, well, we save water, now we're going to sell it, and we become a water seller. So it goes both ways.
And also one thing to note is the buyer may want to buy that water, because if they're not able to purchase that water, they would be curtailed and they wouldn't have any available water supply. And even if they have the right, even if they would like to get that water supply, they wouldn't have the right to divert, because no one has the water supply to sell, or no one can sell them that water supply, right? So just think about it in those lenses, because there are going to be water users out there that won't have the right to divert water supply at a certain point. And if they're not able to purchase the water, they wouldn't have the ability to do that. They wouldn't have the ability to continue diverting water supply.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go and move on? Okay.
Then option C is being distributed out there, because this one, the users feel like it can be implemented quickly, but there are a number of features of this option that are undesirable. But it's being rolled out there because this is very simple. For this option, in Maine, the State Water Board and its users confer to identify potential water conservation levels and regulations. All the water users have to agree to conserve a flat percentage rate on a voluntary basis. This is, again, based on available flows and Lake Mendocino levels. The goal is for all the water users to have access to some water supply, but water right priority is not considered. So somebody with a more junior water right would essentially be able to divert as much as the city in terms of percentages. And this is the first option actually considered by the group in that iterative process. And they left this behind because there were a lot of details that, primarily the water rights issue, that was not addressed. And so the group moved on from there, but are rolling this out because this is still an option that may be implementable in 2022 in lieu of a curtailment action. So again, I'm going to pause here for the committee to provide their feedback.
Well, I'm not big on water rights not being considered. So I guess that's because we have them.
Yeah. And you have them for a reason. I mean, so I'm with, I think water rights need to be a consideration.
I mean, I think it was made clear by the city council a while back that we're gonna get behind this effort to conserve water, and we're gonna do everything we can. That doesn't include giving up our water rights. Okay, Rita, you want to finish it up?
Yes, so next steps. So we'll continue participating in the steering committee, and we'll gather the feedback and share it with them. Our next meeting is on this coming Monday, and so I'll share what the committee says. I'm also meeting with legal counsel and David to kind of go through in a little bit more detail and dive down into these options and just make sure that our feedback is shared with the committee, the steering committee. We'll be conducting an analysis of the options, including the option not to participate. And the steering committee is going to come back with more developed water conservation options. And we will be reviewing that and referring the voluntary water conservation agreement to City Council when that comes about. And we anticipate that that'll be around the April time period. That's it. That's my
Thank you.
presentation.
Any final questions?
Thank you.
Further, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Medora.
Thank you.
And if we can move on to the next item, item 6B, which is request audio controls for First Street and Citrus Square traffic signals. So we have two signals there, and I know we recently, within the last 2 years or so, installed one on Brookwood and Cloverdale Boulevard. And the only other, well, 2 of the 3 lights remaining are those 2. And so.
Chair, we did receive a request to install audible beaconing on both the Citrus Fair as well as First Street. I just personally witnessed a individual who lacks eyesight, crossing First Street, and I believe it was through that individual the request was made for the city to install the audible beaconing system. We've requested a quote for installing those on both of our signalized intersections. The other one that does have one is Treadway. Treadway does also have one. So the intent would be to ensure that both of those intersections are ADA compliant. We did not have the cost of these systems in our budget, so we require a budget adjustment. So with your support, we'll bring forward a budget adjustment to cover the cost of the audible signals. I think preliminary estimates is they run between 12 and 15,000 per signal. I'm not clear on the Citrus Fair that it's going to require some additional cost because of the design of that intersection. But we'll work on getting a proposal and we'll have that, what I expect to have that sometime this week.
Councilman Paula?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Next, review Parks Capital Improvement Program projections.
Chair, included in your packet is a copy of the Parks and Landscape Improvement CIP, the summary sheet as well as the individual worksheets. I think it was requested the subcommittee to be able to review these, and so really it's just provided in your packet for your reference. It identifies the specific projects, the anticipated costs, and then the timeline for those projects. And I think this is an important time to note that the council recently, earlier this year, adopted for the first time in a number of years an updated capital improvement program. And staff really sees this as an ongoing process where council, as part of the annual budget process, takes a look at the CIP and adjusts accordingly, both the project type, the timeline for the project, and then what you'd like to see in the budget for moving that project forward. So really, this is just an opportunity for the subcommittee to take a look at the CIP, determine if you'd like, if this is fine, if you'd like to see changes to the CIP to reflect other projects. I mean, for instance, I could see we could incorporate the CIP or the pickleball court, for example, that we're working on. We could also identify the improvements at City Park relative to the basketball courts. We didn't show them the funding for that it's grant funded in large part, but there is a general fund contribution. But also to identify any other projects or adjust according to any other projects that this subcommittee recommends. The goal really is to, the CIP is a big document, so there's a lot of projects in there. And to try to break it up into pieces that we can kind of review, take a look at, and make recommendations on how to adjust this to reflect what council's priorities are for these important capital improvements.
Joe, any questions?
Well, not a question, just maybe a comment. I know a while back, full review of City Park was done and the schematic was made with what we would like to see if money wasn't an issue. I mean, obviously it was, and we had it blown up, if I recall, Councilmember Walter and I were on that, to where it could be phased in. So recognizing you may have to phase it over many years. And it would be helpful to see that document again and look at that in conjunction with the capital improvement program, things that are identified. So we can maybe look at prioritizing what we think some of the community needs are today, such as pickleball, basketball, those types of programs that we're constantly hearing there's not enough of. So we may want to just revisit and see how that all looks and maybe reprioritize in conjunction with what monies do we have set aside currently, and as we plan budgets as we move forward, how should we look at that? So that's kind of what I would like to just see is the actual plan. Yeah, so I could refresh our memory on that. That's been several years, and in conjunction with the CIP budget, I'd really like to maybe revisit both of those. And I'd like to do it maybe at our next meeting, allot enough time before we go into budget session. I'd really like to kind of get a fresh look at all that. So we're kind of fresh on it as we meet for our budget cycle.
Well, there are some charts that break down the flow chart, the project cost on page 32. And then if you scroll down a little further, it'll show you, for example, the very first one on page 33 is the skate park, but let's skip that. And we can go down to dog park, we can skip that. But if we go down to 2nd Street Park, it's got some of the costs of some of the things, but I'm not quite sure that's what you're talking about. For example, they have barbecue grills, they have scout cabin improvements, they have field and lawn lights. So they've got a couple things, but I don't think it's as detailed as you're looking for. The problem I have, or at least I can't find, is the plaza with the restrooms. If we look at the flow chart, it says the plaza is going to be $350,000 in 2024. I thought the bathrooms were going to go in 2023. In that budget year, 22-23, unless I'm missing something. Oh, maybe I am, because you do have it in 23.
I don't have that right.
Yeah, I know you don't look up here, it tells you the clock, and then it tells you the beginning.
Well, I guess what I was looking for, and that's helpful, but I was looking for the schematic that we had a contractor, not a contractor, but a designer work with us, and we come up with a plan, and that was
Master
good.
plan, so
Yes,
that's a great part, yes.
Yeah, and that was specific to Second Street Park, recognizing we still have Ferber Park we're talking about, as well as the plaza, and those won't be lost in the mix, but that was a big one.
Right.
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to take another look at that and kind of get refreshed on that, because I know when we walked that, we had a lot of different ideas that were floated out there. And, that was all encompassed into that plan, and I'd like to just revisit that.
Yeah, so I think to address your request, Councilmember Paul, what we'll do is, for the next packet, include a copy of the master plan document for City Park. Along, we'll also include a copy of the CIP again, so that we can really match those two up.
And we get it in hard copies, so I mean, I like it so I could kind of mark on it. It's kind of hard for me. It's
Absolutely.
on that. So with these documents, because that'll kind of play with it a little bit.
We'll make you a copy. We'll put it in your box, and then we'll include a digital copy in the packet. And I think, Chair, I think to your point, what you'll want to do is, look at the CIP worksheet and kind of match up what's in the CIP to the priorities that you'd like to see that are identified in the master plan. And that way, that gives us, a direct connection between what we're doing in the CIP with the master plan, but also the budget should reflect what we're doing in the CIP. So those three should really work together. It's master plan informing the CIP, which is informing the budget. And so you have those connections. And every year you can see this is how much we kind of need to budget to implement the master plan document, so that they're all tied together. I think that's what you're driving at.
Yeah.
And it shows, the investments we'll need to make in terms of, funding for those improvements. And then that'll help inform the budget process, in terms of how much we want to, council wants to dedicate towards the master plan effort.
Well, one of the things we have here on page 35 is the River Park. And we came up with a dollar amount for 2024 of 101,000. And it's a combination of a few things. But I'm just wondering, does that include the share for the county? For example, one of them, I think, is a slurry seal for 60,000. I'm sure that's not just our portion, it must be for the whole trail. So the county would actually pick up half of that pen.
That's a good question, Chair. I'd have to ask
Okay.
we check in that on that cost estimate. I just don't know off the top of my head whether that estimate was for the entire length of the trail or just the city side.
And when you do print that out and put one in Councilmember Paul's box, if you can do the same for me.
Sure.
Along with these pages, I think it's whatever it is here, page 32 down to the end of the capital improvements, which would be page 40.
Absolutely. And I think this, the CIP was adopted by council prior to our most recent discussion on the restroom. So that's something, that's why we want to take a look at this, is updated accordingly, to reflect the current timelines for that project, which we hope to bring forward probably next fiscal year.
Councilmember Paul, anything else?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I see no hands out there. So, okay. So why don't we move on to item 6? B, update on American Rescue Plan Act, spending plan, water wells, and possible location of new wells outside Russian River. David, this is yours.
Yeah, I'll take this, and I'll ask Vanessa if you want to weigh in on this item. This is in regards to water wells for city parks and co-location for new wells. Both of these items were items that we addressed in our grant application to Department of Water Resources. So that we're obviously trying to identify additional funding for these projects. Really, I think that the next step for us is to look at doing a feasibility analysis of installing wells at our city parks, and likewise, what it would take to develop a new well outside the Russian River. They're kind of similar but different. I think the water wells for City Park, the intent was to see if we could sink wells to meet our irrigation demands at city parks. But if there is an opportunity to find a new well to supplement our existing water supply, that would be ideal. One of the kind of the issues that has been identified is the regional board's perspective, the state water board's perspective on new wells outside the Russian River. It's an area that we're going to have to take a look at. It seems to be that the state is broadening their perspective on wells that are outside even the Russian, like our existing wells are. And that's something that, Vanessa, I'll maybe look to you. I know you've had some discussion with your team on how the state board is interpreting these wells that are outside necessarily the direct influence of the Russian River.
So my understanding is that the State Water Board has a jurisdictional boundary around the Cloverdale area. Looking at an overlay of city limits on that boundary, there is not anywhere clearly within the city that is outside of the State Water Board's jurisdictional boundary as it pertains to the Russian River. So it's not good news for finding an easy well outside of the limits of the Russian River per se. There is a possible argument that can be made that, for example, if you think about kind of the earth is like a big sponge, and if we pull water from a well in City Park, it creates a cone of depression, and the water flow traveling through the sponge, if you will, the earth strata, would not impact the Russian River until several months down the line. So potentially we could make an argument that even though it would be considered technically, in all likelihood, it would be considered as a diversion, we could make the argument that a well in City Park pulling water during the summer months when we need it would not impact the Russian River until the winter time when flows are higher in the river. It is an argument that needs to be made. There are some legal considerations about this jurisdictional boundary. It's not quite as easy a situation as just, putting a new well in City Park. We're looking at City Park, and we're also looking at the Porterfield open space. And so, these two areas, but we are kind of gearing up to send a letter proposal to the city to do a feasibility analysis, and potentially also include this argument about timing, pulling water in the summer and not impacting the river until the winter, and getting all that kind of wrapped up. But it's unfortunately something that we still need to run by the water board.
Vanessa, I'm sorry, Joe, do you have a comment or question at this point? I do. Vanessa, item number 2 is possible locations for new wells outside the Russian River. What about existing wells? We're in the process now of annexing in Range Water District. We have a well down by the airport. I don't know the quality of the product that those wells put out, or how much it would cost them to bring them up to standard. But would it prohibit us from retrofitting or using existing wells within the city? We got the Range Water District. We have 6 acres, I guess, water district, and we have the Church Lane. Is that right? So there's a possibility of 3 other wells that are already in the city. Any thoughts on that?
You know, the language is clear about new diversions being an issue. And so I would assume that those are existing diversions and we may have an avenue there, but I would have to dig in, and I don't have any answers for you guys today, but that's excellent to hear.
I'm not sure that, the logistics on how we would tap that water and get it over the treatment plant or how we would use it, that's a conversation down the road. I just am curious if we could at least explore that.
Sure. And just what I envisioned is not necessarily a lot of new wells. I was thinking one, and not necessarily to supplement our existing drinking water, but for the fields. I'm thinking more for, for the water, for our city field parks and the school parks. And I'm thinking more of with one well, it could be an existing well that's inoperable. There's some that we've identified that are there. They've just been not used in some time, and it would need to be, whatever they do to set it back up. But with you see these vehicles out there that actually you fill the vehicle with water and then they drive the field and it waters it right behind it. With one of those, we could do all the parks, we could do the school parks and have one well. So I'm not thinking multiple wells, I'm thinking just one well strictly for non-drinkable, but just for the field.
For irrigation.
Yeah, for irrigation. And I think that's kind of where I was kind of leaning towards, because those are quite important for the youth sports and all the different things that go on throughout the year. So, and that also would reduce our use of water considerably from our water treatment plant. So, and it could also be used in an emergency for firefighting purposes as well. So rather than use water from our water source, have a backup alternative for firefighting. So those are the things I was, when I brought this up. So I think looking, and I've seen these vehicles, the state uses them frequently driving down the median, spraying that area. That they have this equipment available. That may be something we really want to look at in conjunction with a well, strictly for that purpose, for all the fields, for irrigation and stuff.
Well, and just to kind of piggyback on that, I know that the well down at the airport is functioning because it supplies north of 101. I think they pump it up, and that might be Range Water District. So if we could tap into that with the water truck, we could start watering the fields almost immediately by taking it right out of that well. If it pumps enough to provide the residents plus us, that would be a question for Hector. I think we already have the vehicle because Hector was using it last year. Hector, you want to throw your 2 cents in if you're available?
Vanessa, is there any exemptions for just irrigation versus municipal water? No.
No, I mean, in irrigation, if it's non-potable, that's a lot of a smaller lift. Potable water is, a lot more hoops and jingles to kind of get through. And so non-potable use is certainly an easier accomplishment. I think the bottom line is whether it constitutes a new diversion or not.
I see you flashing with your hand once in a while. I'm not sure if you're trying to get in or.
I think Hector's trying to speak, so
Just
I'm unmuting him now. Hector, you should be able to speak now.
Vice Mayor Des Walter and Councilmember Joe Paula. Yeah, we have from a maintenance point of view, we do have a 500-gallon water buggy, we call it, with an engine on it, that we utilized quite a bit last summer to water the bigger fields, Fairview Park, Vintage Meadows Park, and 2nd Street City Park. We were using backwash water from the water plant, and that worked out really good. The only situation with that is that having the availability of staff to operate the buggy every day. That was the challenge that we came across. We made it work with our temporary help, but it really requires a full-time, I guess it's only during the summer, 6 or 7 months. So it would require a part-time staff watering every day to water the 3 parks 5 days a week.
From an equipment standpoint, you think the equipment that you used last year would get the job done, using it every day of the week?
If we were to use it every day of the week, for the 6 month period, we could water Furber Park, Vintage Meadows Park, and City Park. The challenge that we get with trucks that are able to carry greater amounts of gallons of water is the compaction factor, to where you're actually getting to not helping the lawn, but you're compacting it because the trucks and the equipment is so heavy. So 500 gallon buggies work good, because the weight is just perfect. The 500, if you times the 500 gallons times the 8.34 per gallon, it's quite heavy. So having maybe another suggestion is to have another buy another one of those water buffaloes, they called, and maybe hire some part-time staff during the summer to allocate to water those fields. That could be an option.
Was there any way that water buggy, not using the sprinkler system, could be tied into the current irrigation? Where you pull up to the irrigation master intake valve and plug that baby in there?
I don't know. It would be something to look at. I've never, that probably wouldn't be possible, but I can look into it, that for sure.
And then Vanessa, also, I'm just wondering, I think this might be a question for you. Would it be beneficial?
Excuse me, it's Yvonne. I'm sorry. I need to leave the meeting. David, I have made you host.
Okay.
And so thanks. I'll catch up later. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Uh-huh.
So Vanessa, a quick question for you. You might not have the answer, but something to look into. Well, this might even be for our city attorney. Would it be more beneficial for us to maintain private water districts instead of bringing the 6 acres? Of course, physically we'll bring them in, but that umbrella of their own water agency, and the same with the Rains, and the same with the South Cloverdale Water Agency, just to maintain separate satellites. Is there any benefit to that?
I would have to get my head around that. I mean, that's, there's a lot of nuances involved in that, and whether those, individual entities are able to kind of carry on independently or not. I would have to check into that.
Well, I'm not saying that they would actually do anything to treat the water. I mean, they would still answer up to the parent company, which would be Cloverdale Water District, and they'd be little subs underneath them. I just wonder if there's any advantages for us doing that. But it's just something to think about.
I think, Chair, if I can, maybe where our interest would be is obtaining or being able to obtain some of the water that they either pump or use, or are able to provide via their wells. And I think that would be something we could look at with our, or through a feasibility study. I think that'd be an issue because there are some technical issues related to. I mean, one, there's the actual, delivery of the water, if you will, treatment and being able to convey it to our customers. And then there's kind of the legal constraints around, some of these are independent districts, and how do we interact with them as a city? Typically, what happens when, for example, South Cloverdale, if they were to annex in the city, that district would actually dissolve. And so at that point, the area and the well would all be located in the city. So that's maybe where we could look at whether we could assume ownership or management of the well and the resources that are provided from that well, so that it can become part of our water system. But again, we want to look at it through the lens of, does it meet our water quality requirements? What's the feasibility of treatment? But I think that's an area, Vanessa, that as you're working on the scope of work for a feasibility study, if we could include that analysis or a task related to evaluating these other districts. And there are, I think, other wells in the community that we could also take a look at and see if there is opportunities for us to supplement our water supply.
And I think that's critical, but to the sheriff, up in the Portofino Preserve up there, and I mentioned it to you, there actually is a natural spring up there that's been there for well before we had a water plant. My understanding was way back, and that was the main source of water for the city way back when in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And during the midst of the drought, I walked up there and still there was water actually coming out of that, and it was running right on down. So I really think, and that goes into the next one, identify possible locations for new wells to augment our existing wells if we get into a severe drought again. And then, the presentation we went through earlier shows that's really a possibility as we move forward. So we really need to be trying to identify options. Obviously we don't have the option of tying into Lake Lake Sonoma, which unfortunately, because without that option, that takes us right out of that equation. But having an option to find where there may be a source of water, then comes the next task: how do we make that water where it could be used on there? But first, we're going to find it. And I guess my question would be, who do we bring in to look at all these different areas to give us some, solid input on what's feasible?
Right. I think
what the next step is.
I think that's the question is right on, and I think that's where we need the kind of the technical expertise that Vanessa's team or other consultants that West Coast might work with to help us do that evaluation.
Yeah.
One, here's source water. Well, can this be? Is it feasible for us to supply our water through accessing these springs? What does it require to bring it up to the treatment levels that we need? And so forth. So kind of
the question is, there water there? Would it be water? If we put a well in, can we get water? And that's going to be the big question. Then if the answer is yes, there's a considerable amount of water available if you had a well. But then we get into, okay, then what's the next step? How do we get that water to the treatment? Do we treat it there on site and ship it right over the hill to the tank? Or is it got to go all the way down to the treatment?
Exactly.
And so there are a lot of those questions, but first it's finding the water source. And I do know, and there's people that live in this community and been here for their whole lives that do know of former well sites that have been sort of boarded up or abandoned. And those would be areas that we want to look at.
Right.
Yeah.
They reevaluate whether there's opportunities to revive those wells. And so I think, Vanessa, that kind of the key next step is developing the scope of work for the feasibility study to really look at this comprehensively, and for us to be able to bring this forward for the committee to help with subcommittee so we can review it. There's technical issues and there's legal issues, and we kind of need to break it down into pieces so we can make progress on this effort, so we can really start to identify some options for supplementing our water source. I did want to mention that one of our tasks that we identified in the grant was to look at some of our existing wells that are well filled and re-drilling those and hopefully be able to increase the production of those wells in a way that will support our water supply. So that's also something that we've identified is refurbishing our own city wells at our within our well field. So it kind of fits into that same narrative.
And I see we have Darren with us.
Darren's listening in.
Darren,
Well, just before we bring it, I just want to make a comment, in the last February 16, 2022, the League of California Cities report, I printed it out, but there's a $1.2 trillion infrastructure investment for jobs act that the federal government passed Congress in November, which includes an estimated for California over $45.5 billion for infrastructure monies. And it's talking about city leaders should begin preparing now and maximize the federal funding in their communities. And it goes on with a lot of information, but the one thing I wanted to get to here is if broken down, they're going to have webinars on each of these categories and how to best prepare ourselves so we can go after some of the money. And one of the things we're talking about now is water, and the webinar is Tuesday, March 15th at 1 p.m. That's going to be the water one. They're going to talk about that. And there's broadband. I know that's later on our agenda, but that's going to be on March 24th. So I'll share this schedule with you, but it's important. I think there is serious money going to be available, and we need to be somewhat positioned. That's why when I talked about where the locations may be and how do we tap that and make that work, if we have a plan, there may be a funding mechanism that we can try to go after to implement that plan. So this is I'll leave this with you. It's got the dates of those webinars, and if you can get those to Vanessa and whoever else you think they may want to tie into that, it's going to talk about that particular topic. There's ones on streets, bridges. There's different webinars for different aspects of the funding mechanism and how to best prepare yourself to get a piece of it. We don't want to miss that window.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Councilmember Paula, I follow up. I'll make sure I get this to you, Vanessa, so you can take a look.
And Darren, we brought you into the meeting as a participant. So if you'd like to share anything about water, we'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts on, getting some of these wells up to speed, and if you just want to say anything, please, your input's welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair Walter and Councilmember Paula. The city has done a lot of extensive research through the decades on water around here. Municipalities, as a rule of thumb, have started trying to limit their dependence on surface waters, because surface waters lend themselves to curtailment, and it went to groundwater, such as like what Ukiah has done. Ukiah has bought up some lots around their town that they identified with good groundwater underneath, and they put a domestic water well in, and they put treatment right on site and pump it right into the system. It might only be 100 gallons a minute, but it's 100 gallons a minute, 24 hours a day. So that was kind of some of our earlier conversations and thought process about, looking at the future of our water and where we get it from. There's a lot of historical knowledge with the surrounding small districts, as Chair Paula or Chair Walters was talking about earlier, with 6 acres having the wells and the different things. One of the key things is seeing what those water rights are, and if those water rights would transfer to us, and also if they're classified as groundwater or groundwater under the influence of surface water. Because groundwater under the influence of surface water will still be, up for curtailment, at an easier or more often pace than groundwater wells would be. But I'm happy to, share all the knowledge I have with the team and help the team, go through and look at, different sites The city has drilled a number of wells in the past. Seems like when we get north of Porterfield Creek, we hit super high iron water, which is extremely expensive to treat. As well as when we get too far south, we have a well at the airport that we drilled that we own. That's just a bare casing right now, but it's really high in iron. It's at the very north end of the runway. It was a test well because the thought process was to put a bunch of wells through city-owned property all the way from the airport, all the way up through the extension of the river park that's supposed to happen out through the old frontage road there around the All Coast property, and bring a line all the way back to the treatment plant for treatment. But when we found out the iron content was so high down there, it's an extremely expensive process to treat that iron and to upgrade our plant to take water with those kinds of constituents. So that's the other thing we have to look at is the water constituents, whether it could be a drinking water well or an irrigation well. And happy to answer any questions. And like I said, my knowledge is here for the team.
Yeah, thank you. And that was some pretty good input. And I'm sure you know Vanessa, if she wants to pick your brain, I'm sure she'll give you a call.
Definitely. Vanessa and I have worked together very, very well for a long time. I think we first started working together back in 2015. So absolutely.
Well, so maybe we can get at least some irrigation water out of some of those wells. If there's nothing else on water, why don't we move on to item number 6E? Okay, all right. Item 6E, request no parking signs on one side of 4th Street. I think we kind of split that up, didn't we, David? We talked about that.
We did, and I think the plan will be to have Debbie Chan take a look at that as part of the review, along with the other two items for 4th Street. I mean, both Sonoma Drive and then the Champlain and North Jefferson. We'll look at all three of those together.
Yeah. Before we leave that, I'm sorry. And then will West Trans be looking at the one on 4th Street, was it 3rd Street, East 3rd Street, or we have that field trip?
Right, I'll add that. I think Vanessa and I were, I don't know, we'll determine if we need their assistance on that. I think we were both looking at that.
Okay, I just wanted we're getting so many of these requests, we need to kind of have a hit list so we don't lose track of who's who. That'd be helpful.
Where on East 3rd Street would we put a stop sign?
Another stop sign. This was for reduction of speed limit potentially, but I think we had some alternative ideas on that. There's community concern over the bus.
All right, item number F, 4th Street reconstruction project.
Okay, this really just item was intended to provide an update. Vanessa, our interim city engineer, has issued a notice to proceed to RIGI construction for the 4th Street reconstruction project. The project does include the replacement or reconstruction of the existing asphalt section, as well as the replacement of 12 water service laterals and the lining of 2 of our wastewater or sewer manholes. The anticipated start date is the 28th of Monday, and we are finalizing a notice that will go to each resident within the project area that would provide an overview of the project, a brief description, but also who the project contact is going to be. We council approved an agreement with Coastland to provide project management and construction management. So we were going to identify that individual as the person that if any residents need to contact, they'll have a direct person to speak to, if there's any ongoing concerns or issues about the, really kind of real time construction activities. But that project is proceeding, so we're happy to report that. And Vanessa, anything you want to add about the 4th Street reconstruction project?
No, I think I might have misheard you, David, but I believe it's 15 water service laterals.
Oh, I said 12. I'm sorry. 15.
Okay. And then they're scheduled for a pre-construction meeting tomorrow, the 23rd. So you will see people out there.
Okay, so can we put something about that in the weekly newsletter? because folks are going to be asking you what's going on 4th Street and Josephine and.
Absolutely. Actually, there's already one in there for this week. Started already there yesterday. And we'll send a copy of the resident notice to all the council members, so you have a copy of that in your email.
So just a real quick question. So just to confirm, it's going to start, scheduled work starts the 28th of February. And what's the timeline, do you think? How many,
But Vanessa, I don't recall the exact number of working days.
It was 45 working days, and so we expect that to go through mid-May.
okay, thank you.
Does that include, oh no, here's a surprise.
Say that again?
Does that include surprises that we find after we start digging?
It does not include surprises.
Like, oh, gas tanks or something, you know?
And there are allowances for bad weather days. So, you know, if it's defined as 45 working days. So if the day, for example, if we're so lucky to get a good rain day, that won't be counted against the working days. I think the intent is to start doing some of the concrete work, initially some of the forming of the sidewalk sections, and then proceed with doing the laterals, and then finally the asphalt section.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, we're going to move to item number 7, which is just a recap on standing items. And David, I'm going to turn the agenda over to you to go on down the list. I know the first one, I'd like to hear an update, and Councilmember Fowler would, I'm sure, on the pickleball installation.
Yeah, that one, there's actually 2 items.
Right.
Yeah. You want to take it? Go with it?
Sure, happy to do that, Chair. So just, I'll just work down the list and stop me where you want to. The first item, you know, we're still waiting for the response from DWR on our grant application. I want to acknowledge Councilmember Paula for obtaining the support of our Assembly Member Wood and our State Senator Mike McGuire in support of our grant application. So I don't have a specific date to provide to the subcommittee on when we expect them to get back to us on our grant application. I know it was very competitive, but we'll do a follow-up email and just continue to check in with them and see if we can't get a more firm date on when they might be finalizing their review. I know they received a lot of them, so they might be, may not be able to give us a specific schedule for when they'll have a response, but they might be able to give us some sort of target timeline for the program. Update on options for pickleball court. So really at this stage, what we're continuing to do is to get cost estimates for the work. Hector Galvan, our park superintendent, did meet with additional contractors to get cost estimates last week. So we're continuing to get quotes. Our goal is to get the quotes for the different project elements, asphalt, fencing, striping, to look at the total project cost to see whether we need to put the project to bid, or we can do it through uniform accounting procedures in our meeting code, and that'll be dependent on where the cost estimates come in or under that threshold. So that's kind of where we're at now. It's still just getting the cost estimates, and hopefully before the next meeting we'll be able to identify a total project cost for this work and determine what steps are next to move this project forward.
And I really encourage you, when we get those cost estimates, I'd really like to see us look at if we need to phase in our process. It's going to really, I think, try to circumvent the process, but it's going to really raise the cost if we go out to public bid. And I don't think for a small project like this, we really want to do that. So I think we should take a look at that seriously.
Okay, item is 7B. It's kind of a really good update on public restrooms. council approved the budget adjustment. We're gonna contract with Mo, start doing the bid specs and the design work for connecting the restroom to the city's.
Proposal from Mo, and I've reached out to the vendor and let them know which model we're interested in. Paperwork there too.
That was a month ago, so.
Yeah, when the council. Yeah.
So this is underway. Is it on the agenda for tomorrow night's meeting again?
It is not, because I think we've got the necessary approvals from council.
I thought we did. That's
Yeah.
why I thought I heard you say, okay, so that one.
It was about a 6-month lead time on the fabrication of the restrooms, and then so we're hoping to, finalize the agreement with Mo, get that work underway, be able to put it out to bid to do the the necessary improvements for the water and wastewater connections, so that once it's done, we can put it in place. So. Multiple pieces to it, but we're going to continue to make progress on moving that forward. I think timing wise, I mean, it looks like we'll probably target it. Well, we expect, I anticipate that Friday Night Live will kind of be scheduled normally this year, and starting last week in May. So we would probably target, if everything goes as planned, starting that project right after completion of Friday Night Live this year.
Yeah, it's 6 months out on that.
So it puts us right now. It puts us in about August, and Friday Night Live usually wraps up at the end of August, 1st of September. So it might be really good timing to get right in at the start of September. Start doing that work. Let's see, moving forward, update on the per capita grant program. I think we're ready to execute.
Yeah, we also have a proposal from Mo. We have to play that one by the, with the bid, because it's a grant. So we have Mo's proposal. We went out to the site with Mo and Hector, had some pretty good ideas, and we're going to be putting together some plans for bid. And so the grant's already in place. We need to move on the Mo proposal.
So what's the timeline, do you think, realistically on that?
Hector, do you got any thoughts on the timeline for the basketball court?
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, I mean, at this point, we're waiting for council direction as far as if once we get now that we have the engineer study, kind of moving forward with Mo Engineering, if they agree on their costs, on Mo Engineering's costs, to go forward with start going out to bid and start, reaching out to these contractors to start the process. So I would think probably at towards the end of summer, I would think.
Yeah, we have Mo's proposal, so we need to sign with them. And we just got this pretty recently. Sure. So then he's listed all the steps that occur, go to bid, the management. He doesn't have timelines though. But yeah, I think Hector's right. Probably maybe this would be around the same time as the bathrooms.
Good, thank you.
Okay, moving forward to item 7D. This is the citywide striping plan. So put in your packet is a proposal from W-Trans to assist the city with updating the updated striping for citywide. The plan really is intended to be a comprehensive plan for the city. I know Vanessa worked with W-Trans team, Deline too, on identifying kind of what our goals were, which included identifying areas where we may want to do some asphalt improvements, So I don't know, Vanessa, anything else you'd like to add to the proposal that W-Trans provided in the packet? We emphasize that there are some key locations within the city that would be a priority for striping, and the location and the distance. That's anything you want to add on that?
No, I think this looks good. I believe this is everyone's understanding of what we're looking at.
Just chime in a little bit there. In that packet I gave you from the league, there's a lot of money earmarked for streets and infrastructure. And we have some really bad streets, as you know, and we really would like to see if we can get some funding, at least start working on those.
So I think, right now, I guess the question for the subcommittee is, would you like us to go ahead and move this effort forward? If so, I think this is something we need to confirm will require a budget adjustment if we want it in this year's budget. Otherwise, we can put it in the budget process and bring it forward with a new as part of a proposed new fiscal year budget. If you'd like us to, this scope will require council approval. We could package that with council approval with the budget adjustment, or again, if you want us to bring it forward as part of the next year's budget. So,
Yeah, I think personally, I'd like to see it go on next year's budget. We've got quite a few budget adjustments going in now. How do you feel about that?
Well, and I got mixed feelings. I'm more concerned with identifying what we need and what the cost is, and to be able to move quickly to try to tap some of that federal funding that's available. And I'm not sure what the deadlines are for all those. There is the webinar that's going to talk about all that. And so I don't have that information, but there is a window, and we really need to be positioned to go in when the money's there, because I don't see this being repeated, these funding. So I've got mixed feelings. Some of these, some of these striping is really not in compliance with state law currently, where we have double yellow lines that are not double yellow lines anymore, and a lot of the block dots are missing, and these are safety issues that again need to be addressed. So I got mixed feelings. Maybe how about if we do something like package it up, if we're going to do a budget review, I guess, coming up here, and maybe we can see if there's a way that we can move that forward real soon.
Well, David, talk to me a little bit about, Councilmember Powell just mentioned a few different grants that are out there for different things. Who applies for these? What's that process? He just told you about one for infrastructure on streets. Who's actually going to do that grant application? Is that Vanessa?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's more than likely we'll have to speak with Vanessa to determine if she would be the lead on the grant application. Everyone kind of needs to be reviewed in the context of what you're applying for, and who's the right person to kind of lead that effort up. In some cases, we may be looking at trying to see if there's a grant writer available to assist us. I think that's kind of a broader theme that this kind of staff has talked about. There's a real need for. There's so many grants out there, and it's really kind of almost a full-time work task in and of itself to have someone managing, monitoring, tracking, and kind of being strategic about our efforts as well. But I think, I mean, the point that Councilmember Paula mentions about having a plan in place is well taken, because that's what puts you when you're writing a grant. It's a lot easier to prepare an application when you have a plan. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a plan, it's kind of usually you're not as competitive, and it's harder to write because now you're trying to formulate a plan to prepare your application. So it is tough timing wise, but you also raise a good issue, Chair. We need it. It's the kind of chicken and egg argument of, we need to prepare the plan or do we write the grant application first? And there's certainly benefits to having the plan in place.
We constantly talk about grants and money out there with stimulus, and we get buckets, we get nothing.
Well, in fairness, I have to say, I don't think they apply for everything either. We have lost some, but again, the reason I don't think we're as well prepared, and David hit the nail on the head. There's professional grant writers out there that they know how to put the right buzzwords in there. They're getting top priority in smaller cities. And that was one of the big arguments we had when a lot of these grants, the small cities don't have the staff or the ability to write a competitive grant against these cities that have a full-time grant writer. And so they're getting the money and we're getting nothing. That doesn't mean we don't need the money. We still have a lot of problems. So but I guess where I'm coming from, the stimulus money or these grant opportunities that's out there, this isn't the time to procrastinate and say, well, we'll just wait. I mean, we need to position ourselves. That's no guarantee we're going to get it. But boy, I'll tell you, we're not going to get a nickel if we don't. And that's for sure. I'm happy we got the 200,000 for the basketball courts, and we're going to be looking at, hopefully they'll write some potential with the ASCII road safety issues over through their safe routes. Yeah, there may be some monies to address some of those concerns. But again, we've got to have a plan to do that, and we've got to be time right. So if there's no right or wrong to all this, it's a matter of you got to go by the grant and their timeline. So it puts the burden on us to be ready to be competitive.
Yeah, it makes it important to have an updated CIP too.
Yeah.
And those projects have been identified at the lowest level, but they haven't identified as a need, which is a base for a grant application.
Yeah, I think, kind of where I approach this is I think staff working with council kind of needs to prioritize what projects we want to apply. What are the key projects and activities that we want to complete? Because I think there are literally grant programs to fund almost all of these things that we want to do. But being strategic about it, which are the ones we want to kind of dedicate resources to? What are the key priorities of the council and the subcommittee, and then kind of target our energy on those efforts.
Well, I still think, having an outside grant writer consulting and taking the lead on some of these, because they have all our data. This isn't something we have to go out and find it. This is what they do. And I think, it's money well spent. We spend, $20,000 to give 200,000. That's a good investment.
Right. A good example is we consulted, West Yost prepared the grant application for the PWR. So, in a sense, they were our grant writer for us. And if we get the $3 million, well, that's going to be quite a well spent.
Right. So but I do know you don't get nothing if you don't get it.
Well, you need a lottery ticket to win the lottery. And you're absolutely right. I was just looking, we constantly talk about it, but it's like, who does all this heavy lifting? I know some of the grants allow for reimbursement of payment to the grant writer. But yeah, we need to plot forward and get some of the grant money.
Well, especially
that should be priority.
There's never been this kind of dollars available to cities.
They account for small cities like us.
Yeah.
So competitive.
Yeah. So it's important. This is probably not going to be repeated in the next year or two. We really need to position ourselves to try to get as much as we can and fix a lot of the things we're trying to do.
Okay, so then we'll do a budget adjustment for this restriping and pavement management.
Okay, so staff will bring forward an agreement. I think, maybe what we'll do is, since, we're going to be talking with WKN about a comprehensive scope of work for transportation engineering services, is maybe just include this And this could be a task order that we can execute with them. So trying to figure out how best to, address their services. And I think we need a task order agreement. So what we'd probably be looking at is something more than this, so that it covers other services.
And when you put the staff report together, would you be sure to tie it to the availability of potential grant funding? That's what makes this timing, because otherwise I'd agree with the chair. I think we just work it into the budget year, but I don't think that would be the smart way to go now because of the potential loss of an opportunity here to tie in some funds. So that's a real important fact that everybody on the council, as well as the community, need to understand. This is a one-time thing that we want to try to get ahead.
Yeah, and just to your point, Councilman Paula, shovel-ready, generally speaking, very generally speaking, shovel-ready projects are much more competitive on funding applications. And so, it's possible to get, this proposal funded, but if the proposal is fulfilled and these plan sheets are developed, that is essentially a shovel-ready project that's, much more competitive.
Okay, moving on. This is in regards to the traffic signal optimization, and we talked about modifying the signal to include what they call a flashing yellow arrow operation. Included in your packet is the proposal from DC Electric, and that includes the work that would be prepared by W-Trans for the the electrical design drawing necessary to support this change. So just wanted to include it for your reference. The modification to that work is just a little under 25,000. So it's as it is, it's within my just under my signature authority, so I can approve this. I wanted just to reflect one that what it would look like was there's a picture that was included in the email from Tim Carr with DC Electric that would identify that it allows for that left turn, so that would be either northbound or southbound on the boulevard onto Treadway or Santana, and what that modification would actually physically look like on the signal. But a lot of that work was really going into the electrical panel and making the programming changes to accommodate this flashing left turn on flashing yellow. We call it FYA. Anyway, that's just an update. Okay.
So you're going to design that moving forward?
Yes. And let's see, moving on, just an update on the Portobello Creek. I want to acknowledge the work that Hector did as coordination, project management on the phase 1 project. I think that if you haven't had the chance to take a look at the trailhead and just kind of do a quick little walk down to the first bridge, you can really see a lot of the vegetation, the impact of the project. Of course, it goes all the way up to the water tanks. So this phase 1, I think, accomplished a lot of creating and helping create that buffer between residential development and park. Of course, there's a lot more to do, and Hector's working with the Northern Sonoma County fire crews on addressing kind of phase 2, which is off of Sonoma Drive, mostly private property, but trying to again accomplish that additional area again to help build that buffer, that fire break between the residences and the park itself. So I think for all intents and purposes, it was really a successful project. And glad we accomplished it. I think it's something we're going to continue to work with the fire district to identify what's the cost of the work, and bring that forward as part of the budget process to continue to make progress.
And I'd like to encourage, I know we're going to be doing a budget, but I'd really like to encourage us to get our own mulching machine. Or
the chipper?
Yeah, the chipper, because we have a lot of trees, a lot of vegetation. And it just doesn't make sense when they're in the lighting and landscape district, having to load all that onto a big truck and haul it down, the time it takes where it could be mulched on the spot and continue. Yeah, so it really is, I think it would be a wise investment to get the tools, because fires, the threat's going to continue indefinite, as we know, with the drought situation. So we could have make our crews have the ability to do a lot more within the same hours, because it takes a lot of time to load, haul it down, unload, come back, or this could be done right on the job. Sure. And Hector, you might want to weigh in on that.
I think Hector would be happy to get a chipper in his budget. So that would probably be when we want to bring that forward.
Yeah, just to touch on, back on the Porterville Creek, phase 2, just to give you guys some general knowledge. I was in contact with Chief Tuberville Marshall this morning. I guess the Northern Sonoma County Fire Fuels are currently working on the Fitch Mountain Park, and when they complete that project, they're going to be switching over back to phase 2, the vegetation management along phase 2 along Sonoma Drive and Clover Springs. And again, the grant money awarded to Cloverdale Fire will be paying for this effort for phase 2 of this. I just wanted to share that info with you guys, because like I said, I was talking to Chief Marshall this morning. And yeah, as far as the wood chipper, yeah, I really think we can utilize a good wood chipper. They're very expensive, I know. So I think we should probably start looking into getting some quotes to at least give you guys an idea of the cost involved with this machine.
And Hector, it would help, I think, the city council to know how many man hours you think would be saved in a day of cutting and trimming, and if you were able to chip and mulch on site versus having to haul it into a truck and unload it, so there's a trade-off, there's a cost, but you're actually maybe gaining 2 or 3 hours a day extra work time and efficiency. So I'd be interested, as you put that proposal together, to capture all that information. That's important.
So yeah, it sounds good. I think I already have one quote. It's kind of outdated, so I'll get some new quotes and see if we can get some numbers together.
And Hector, we'll want to look at source well, of course, see if we can get a source well quote.
Right.
Pre-bid price. All right, well, just moving down, the next item is just an update on repair of sidewalk and asphalt of East Second. The location next to Eagle Tech. We did do some remediational repair work there and address the tripping hazards in the asphalt. And I think the plan was to work with some local contractors to get a cost estimate for replacement as kind of our next step, Vanessa, on that. Now that we're now kind of moving back into spring. And so that I think will be our next step. Anything, Vanessa, you want to add? Is there really just getting to work to do the kind of similar to 4th Street in a way? It's going to be remove the existing asphalt and then replace it. The trees have been removed, and then a couple of asphalt, a couple of flags sidewalk. We were going to determine if that could be done in house or whether we need to procure outside services. But ideally, we might be able to do that in house.
That's the hope.
Yeah. And we did talk a little bit with
I mean, when you say crew, how many men?
Well, we have 2 members of our streets crew. We could, they're capable of doing it.
But going back, I'm just curious. I know there's certain times of the year that it's best to do asphalt work. When do you envision the best time to start that, based on weather, etc.?
Well, I'm still holding out hope for a rainy season.
Yes.
But typically the best time to pave is when it's hot weather for hot pavement. And that's anyways, the earliest we would be looking at is, spring, early spring, June and July are usually prime paving times of the year.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I could just piggyback on that, David, the other day I took a ride on the alleyways. The one behind the nursery, Rockydale. And I took a ride, the one behind our building that we're renting from Franco.
Yeah.
And both of those look pretty good. It's just kind of a reminder that we committed that we look at regrading those if need be in the spring, and then again the end of the summer before the rain season. So.
Was that, any report on our asphalt improvements or holding
Yeah, we're still holding up good. Yeah, still holding up on Rockydale. Yeah. Now, I haven't seen Susan's birthday in quite a while. But I see her husband a lot. So I should ask him how she's doing.
I mean, I think, well, if I look at it, we don't have much rain this year. Yeah, so usually we'll get those big rain events is when you kind of start seeing some of the problem. But otherwise, I've seen a lot of rain, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. They're holding up pretty good.
Okay, moving forward, the update on the Public Health Vision Zero project, including the packet is actually a full copy of the draft plan. We've been really promoting this, or at least providing updates in the Cloverdale newsletter. This is an effort that's being overseen by Sonoma County Transportation Authority and County Department of Health to develop a plan to reduce the traffic fatalities in Sonoma County. Vision Zero meaning, literally targeting zero fatalities. This plan was approved by the SUPA board. Next step is to go to the county board of supervisors for final approval. We have been really engaged in the process and making sure that the kind of our Cloverdale specific issues were reflected in the planning effort. I think we did a good job on that. And again, now we'll have a plan that will also help us with applying for other grants too, where it involves improvements that relate to kind of traffic safety. So you're seeing more of these types of plans be developed throughout the state as the focus has become on how to address really vehicle-related fatalities, but also pedestrian device fatalities. And so that's part of what the planning effort was intended to address. And we'll definitely look at this as part of our resource document for our project in Cloverdale. Not much more to report on that. I anticipate it'll get approved by the board.
So the Cloverdale is going to be submitting the request and to be done in Cloverdale.
Well, once the plan's adopted, it's a countywide plan. It's kind of like a countywide bicycle pedestrian plan. We were participants in the planning process. So it's really intended as a countywide document. And once it's adopted, it's just it's another resource document that we can use to help. When we do apply for grants, to show that if there is a plan and there might be elements of this that we are seeking to utilize for our investment.
So just one comment, if we could check with maybe the police chief could check this with the Office of Traffic Safety. I know that funding's been tight, but I really think we should try to get a speed trailer, and especially one that records speeds, because we are getting a lot of concerns about speed or what people feel is excessive speed in various areas. And my understanding, our trailer is no longer functioning, and it was questionable whether it did capture speeds when it did when it was new. So it's an older one. But I think we would be wise to, if there is funding available, to at least go after that. Because that's an important piece as we hear these concerns and to be able to monitor and track.
Absolutely. Well, I think we will identify budget resources to purchase one, and then if we can offset that with the grant, we'll identify that as revenue.
Yeah.
I'll make a note here.
And the existing one may be able to be modified to include that. So, it may just need to be new inner components to it. So, but I think it's important to get one that's off, get it off. So we could deploy it out throughout the city.
I think we could use it, we could just move it around town.
Area do,
Our plan on that, Councilor Paul, is to put that in the budget. And of course, we can identify the grant revenue, we'll put that in there too. Let's see, update on sustainable groundwater management plans. Not a lot to report there. There was a article that indicated that PG&E was going to proceed with replacing the transformer that was broken, that has reduced the amount of water that transferred over from the Potter Valley project and Lake Mosquito, but I think that project is expected to take a couple of years, 2 to 3 years to complete. So we're not going to see that any short-term relief in terms of additional water being transferred over. The other aspect is that I think there was a request for extension of the timeline to be able to compile the application to help with its relicensing process. And I think FERC called that kind of said, they're not going to extend any timelines, and really the only entity that was identified was a combination of Sonoma County Water Agency, Water Resources Association. So I'm not sure where this project's going to go. It's probably really going to come down to whether Congress can help them try to lead up on that to seek some kind of solution here with this project. It is a critical one. And there's different perspectives on different aspects of the project that are pretty complicated. So I won't delve too deeply, but we continue to track it in major developments. We'll report out on it. The next time is annual SB1 project. Provided the status update on the 4th Street reconstruction project, which is largely SB1 funded project. This is a good time to start thinking about what the subcommittee might want to identify on our list for future consideration. One fund C maybe looking at dedicating future SB1 funds maybe to Oski Road. But I just tossed that out there as an idea. Obviously, we're just interest in looking at how we might improve Oski and either Citrus Fair or at 1st Street Park Bridge, so that be an opportunity to dedicate SB1 funds there. So, I think that's something we'll want to bring forward later in the year. Is a designation of SB1 projects by the council. What are your priority projects? And you're starting to earmark those funds for future improvements. Let's see, update on the airport capital improvement program. Really, the major project that we have on that list is drainage improvements. And we have a preliminary design. We're just working with FAA on how to address the environmental requirements from the under NEPA, the Federal Environmental Review Statute. And so we continue to coordinate with FAA on our ASIP, and that helps guide the capital improvement projects at our airport. Not much to report there. Update on 6 acres. Kevin attended a monthly meeting of the 6 acres project team. They've implemented the state has approved the work plan that includes project management, engineering, and environmental work that's going to be required to support the pre-annexation process. I think the engineer is going to be GHP. There's a project engineer or a project manager that's going to be funded through the separate. Her name's Marlene Demery. So they're trying to really provide a kind of a turnkey approach to this developing the documentation to support annexation of that area into the city, which means full improvement plans for both sewer and water, or wastewater and water. That's really kind of the state processes seem to work very slow. Yeah. There's some frustration. They started
6 months before they can get the project manager going. So I'm not sure what the goal of this, but I mean, everything from the city side is completed. We've given them the pre-annexation agreement with all the attachments, so we're waiting them to return and sign, and then we'll sign it to the back of them. So we're kind of, we've kind of done our part for the moment. We might have to do some stuff in the future, but it's on them right now. Moving forward, take it to the county, start the annexation.
The next item was update on Rule 28. We provided a brief report. It's really, I think, what we need to do is bring forth some options for establishing a project area that we can do some underground work. I guess it's really a subcommittee how you'd like us to. Would you like us to bring forward a list or potential areas? I think, Chair, you mentioned kind of south of town, looking at kind of South Cloverdale Boulevard, near the Renner fueling station, potential area. But just in order to move it forward, staff seeking your direction, how you'd like to see us bring this forward for further discussion.
Well, the only reason I had suggested that South Cloverdale area is because of all the building that was going to be done. And when we require somebody to put in undergrounding along the frontage there, it would be nice if we're setting the example. So we pick a section and we can do it. So that's the only reason I picked that. I think Councilmember Paula had mentioned something about 2nd Street, and that is already underground.
Maybe calling bring this forward with some options. I think one of the problems was it's just so expensive. I don't get money in there. It's very little money. You need like 3 poles at the point. So we can still identify where we want to prioritize that.
Well, maybe what we can do is when the developer goes in there, I can't remember, does the wine storage have underground in front now?
They came and asked, they gave us a deposit on future undergrounding, but they did not get it done.
Well, maybe we can, what I was saying, if we do require and somebody actually does it, maybe we could pay the contractor, another couple of feet. Taking some money, partner up with the wine storage, the money they've already paid, the money we have, and maybe do the front of their property. And then we've got bones about it coming in.
He'll be required to underground all of his stuff.
Yeah.
You won't get out of that one, but.
I mean, just a thought there. Thank you, David.
Okay, moving on, 7N is update on First Street Parker Bridge pedestrian improvement project. I know the county continues to make progress on their design work. I did receive a request from Johanna Sovers, the Director of Public Works, for dedication of an area, the city property immediately adjacent to the entrance to River Park. I asked our city attorney to review the proposed dedication. It looks like this is something I know Vanessa's also taking a look at it, that will require council approval. What we were seeking was to ensure that we had the ability to install any underground infrastructure improvements that might be needed by the city in the future, water lines or other types of improvements that again would if we needed that area for those, just providing that the necessary easements and dedications for that. So we're in discussions with the county on how to achieve that right now. So we're still kind of working that out. I think the county prefers to have it free of any easements, but of course we're kind of interested in protecting our ability to install future improvements should we need to, whether it's for a new well, existing infrastructure, whatever it may be. But likewise, I don't want to hamstring the project. I know it's important to improve pedestrian and bicycle access to the road.
Especially if you're up well on the east side there.
I mean, his response is, well, we can apply for an encroachment permit should we need that in the future. And I just was trying to avoid a situation where we dedicate land to, then we then have to get a permit to utilize it for some, important need of the city. But, I think Vanessa, you and I were in alignment on that. And it was just kind of trying to figure out how best we can address that. And otherwise, a lot of the documentation is there, it's ready to go, and it's just it's a relatively small, it's not a big area, but nonetheless, we'd be giving something to them for free. We want to make sure our interests are there. And then I think just last item here on the 7.0 is update broadband funding and CPC upgrades. Get the information that Councilmember Paula provided about, looks like potential grant funding for broadband.
Yeah, and there's also the other one that the state through AB 14 and SB 4 has made available for broadband. So there's two potential funding mechanisms we can go after. So that's why, again, getting back to having shovel-ready plans is critical. And I'm not sure if that one's opened up yet, the state one. So you were going to check, I think, last time we spoke. So if we could maybe just follow up on that, that'd be great.
We did receive an update from the CPUC. It came in on Friday. I just have to watch that. The chair, I think that concludes a brief update on there's a long list of standing items. Just as something for the committee's consideration is we want to keep them all on there as kind of holding places for those items, or is there any you'd like us to maybe pare the list down or remove? It's really good direction.
Yeah. Well, I just like to keep things on the burner, or else they fall through the cracks. I can't think of anything that we could possibly drop. 4th Street, where was that? The update on 4th Street, item number J. Okay. I don't know if we're going to have that as a regular discussion item just for updates like we did today. So, but no, I'm comfortable with everything that's on there. So, Councilman Paula.
Yeah, I think we could just, some of them are real close, and it's nice to just keep them. So say this one's signed, it's on the way, here's the date, then we can remove it, it's done. Just so we kind of keep abreast of where we're at on this thing.
Yeah, maybe we make a deal with you. If we put one on.
Okay, I like that.
No net gain.
No. Okay, if nobody else wants to revisit any of the items on number 7, we can move on to future agenda items.
That question, I had raised it last time, and I'm not sure if you had a chance. Asked if somebody could, Vanessa from your office, if you could reach out to the Caltrans to figure out the purpose, what generated the need for stop signs on the South Cloverdale Boulevard overpass. They just appeared, and nobody knew anything about it. And it seems like it would be pretty, it's pretty odd because there's just not that kind of volume of traffic to generate those stops. A lot of people thought we put them in as a city, and of course we didn't even know about it until we saw them. So just curious, what generated the need for those? Was there a history of accidents that we're unaware of, or something? But it would be good to figure out, because it's odd they didn't talk to us first, or at least inform us, which we're going to do. So.
Yeah, I have no recollection whatsoever, or a discussion with Caltrans regarding those. And what we're referring to, Vanessa, is on the westbound lane from Osti Road before the northbound on-ramp. There's a stop sign. And I'm just presuming that Caltrans made a determination that maybe for safety, that was an appropriate place to stop, to make a stop sign, place to stop sign. It's at least from my perspective, it's kind of difficult to spot You don't really see it in that location.
And they didn't do it on the west side of the same overpass. So if you're going there where people are coming southbound, you don't, it just didn't seem to be a need for, I was just curious if we could just check with them what generated it. Is there something we don't know going on there?
Could be large trucks turning north, maybe, and
But it never backs up there.
No, I drive that so frequently and I just never seen a problem there. So I'm just curious.
Okay. Good of the order. I've just got two things. We're talking about, what the county is talking about, the Rancheria buying the hotel. I think it's Vineyards Creek Hotel. Could somebody just check and see? I did an estimate from my house to that property. It's 1,500 feet. Somebody just double check me. I just want to make sure that I can.
What is it to what?
No, in my house.
Oh, your house.
To the proposed site.
Sorry.
I think it's 500 feet now.
for conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can check in the GIS. We can give you a
Just
map.
make sure I'm okay to weigh in on that.
Okay.
And then there was a couple of emails. I know these on agenda items, but just for the good of the order. About the Cherry Creek project and some of the vouchers that came in. There's emails I've gotten today. I think everybody did, include Councilmember Paula. And I've got a phone call here from Colleen. I'm thinking of asking her to come to city council meeting on the public comment and just say anything that she wants to about. But I have a feeling this is going to become an issue. Anybody see any problems on that, or we know what could have happened there?
I mean, certainly, Colleen can come and speak in public comment. I mean, I think because there is tremendous interest, maybe it's not the most conducive to a discussion on the item. It's not intended for discussion. We could work with Colleen to, bring an item forward to provide an update. Maybe, of course, welcome her to attend the meeting on tomorrow. And that we, if the council so directs, we can bring it forward as a future agenda.
Part of it, that's what I did ask the question earlier. What generates the, people feel it's going to be made available for low income families that live in Cloverdale that are in need of housing, and then that changes, and that seems to be what I'm reading. And again, that I think it's going to be more of an education on how does this whole process work, and can we legally, when a project comes forward, have a condition of approval that X number of homes has to be available. And I think you answered me no, but I think that's what we gotta put together some kind of an educational, so people can weigh in. I mean, they may not like it, they gotta understand how the process works. Because I think there's that unknown, they don't understand it, they're angry. And they feel that we gave them bad information, or we, as a city, didn't do our due diligence, and we didn't ask the right questions, and now this is being pushed on us. And so that might be a better way, is to come in with an informational item that explains how this all works. So in the future, I mean, it's one of those where I think more times than not, the frustration is we are very limited as a city as to what conditions we can put on some of these projects by law. And that's the part that people get upset about, because they feel we have more authority than we do. And so I don't know. That's why I had asked Kevin that question. And I think there's just a lot of people aren't clear what this all is. So maybe if you're agreeable, maybe in a future meeting, hopefully with a lighter agenda in the next month and a half, whatever, we can have an information only item, no action, just answer questions and just walk us through the community through how all this application works, various funding, what our authority is as a city when it's a low to moderate, housing project, and just walk us through that process so people really understand. And again, I know there's council members that aren't as clear as we should be either on this. So just a thought.
Or we do, in whatever direction council provides, later, we of course, I think appreciate that because we do have I think we have a busy agenda tomorrow, but we also likewise are getting busy agenda first meeting in March. But I guess that's just a reflection.
Can you maybe announce tomorrow night's meeting under city manager report that we're going to be doing this? There's a lot of confusion on what our legal rights are. We need to be working on the PowerPoint as an informational item come out that's going to answer questions and walk us all through it. So that would be
we want to, I think, coordinate with the Sonoma County Community Development Commission, who's the entity that ran housing vouchers, and they really are the ones that are defining what the rules are relative to use of these funds.
I'd be interested in knowing if they find them after they issue them or not. I can't imagine they would do that, but we should have known going in that they were strings. I hate to refer to them as that were attached to the vouchers.
Right.
That was completely arbitrary. Yeah, to seek those vouchers, we didn't really have a role in seeking that funding.
and the other part, again, following that thought process, what control do we have as a city to make that as a condition if we don't like to leave the voucher? Do we have the ability to put conditions that are legal? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I'd like to know.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Vanessa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Terry, you've already gone as Sharon, but thank them as well. So meeting adjourned. We'll see you next month.
Thank you, guys.
So I'm going to invite her to come tomorrow night.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
All right.